Part II of Sophist by Plato, translated by Benjamin Jowett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Stranger. Do you not see that when the professor of any art has one name and many kinds of knowledge, there must be something wrong? The multiplicity of names which is applied to him shows that the common principle to which all these branches of knowledge are tending is not understood. Theaetetus. I should imagine this to be the case. Stranger. At any rate, we will understand him, and no indolence shall prevent us. Let us begin again, then, and re-examine some of our statements concerning the Sophist. There was one thing which appeared to me especially characteristic of him. Theaetetus. To what are you referring? Stranger. We were saying of him, if I am not mistaken, that he was a disputer? Theaetetus. We were. Stranger. And does he not also teach others the art of disputation? Theaetetus. Certainly he does. Stranger. And about what does he profess that he teaches men to dispute? To begin at the beginning, does he make them able to dispute about divine things, which are invisible to men in general? Theaetetus. At any rate, he is said to do so. Stranger. And what do you say of the visible things in heaven and earth, and the like? Theaetetus. Certainly he disputes and teaches to dispute about them. Stranger. Then, again, in private conversation, when any universal assertion is made about generation and essence, we know that such persons are tremendous argufiers, and are able to impart their own skill to others. Theaetetus. Undoubtedly. Stranger. And do they not profess to make men able to dispute about law, and about politics in general? Theaetetus. Why, no one would have anything to say to them if they did not make these professions. Stranger. In all and every art, what the craftsman ought to say in answer to any question is written down in a popular form, and he who likes may learn. Theaetetus. I suppose that you are referring to the precepts of Protagoras about wrestling and the other arts? Stranger. Yes, my friend, and about a good many other things. In a word, is not the art of disputation a power of disputing about all things? Theaetetus. Certainly there does not seem to be much which is left out. Stranger. But, oh, my dear youth, do you suppose this possible? For perhaps your young eyes may see things which to our duller sight do not appear. Theaetetus. To what are you alluding? I do not think that I understand your present question. Stranger. I ask whether anybody can understand all things. Theaetetus. Happy would mankind be if such a thing were possible. Stranger. But how can any one who is ignorant dispute in a rational manner against him who knows? Theaetetus. He cannot. Stranger. Then why has the sophistical art such a mysterious power? Theaetetus. To what do you refer? Stranger. How do the Sophists make young men believe in their supreme and universal wisdom? For if they neither disputed, nor were thought to dispute rightly, or, being thought to do so, were deemed no wiser for their controversial skill, then, to quote your own observation, no one would give them money, or be willing to learn their art. Theaetetus. They certainly would not. Stranger. But they are willing. Theaetetus. Yes, they are. Stranger. Yes, and the reason, as I should imagine, is that they are supposed to have knowledge of those things about which they dispute? Theaetetus. Certainly. Stranger. And they dispute about all things? Theaetetus. True. Stranger. And therefore, to their disciples, they appear to be all wise? Theaetetus. Certainly. Stranger. But they are not, for that was shown to be impossible. Theaetetus. Impossible, of course. Stranger. Then the sophist has been shown to have a sort of conjectural or apparent knowledge only of all things, which is not the truth? Theaetetus. Exactly. No better description of him could be given. Stranger. Let us now take an illustration which will still more clearly explain his nature. Theaetetus. What is it? Stranger. I will tell you, and you shall answer me, giving your very closest attention. Suppose that a person were to profess, not that he could speak or dispute, but that he knew how to make and do all things by a single art. Theaetetus. All things? Stranger. I see that you do not understand the first word that I utter, for you do not understand the meaning of all. Theaetetus. No, I do not. Stranger. Under all things I include you and me, and also animals and trees. Theaetetus. What do you mean? Stranger. Suppose a person to say that he will make you, and me, and all creatures. Theaetetus. What would he mean by making? He cannot be a husbandman, for you said that he is a maker of animals? Stranger. Yes, and I say that he is also the maker of the sea, and the earth, and the heavens, and the gods, and of all other things, and further, that he can make them in no time, and sell them for a few pence. Theaetetus. That must be a jest. Stranger. And when a man says that he knows all things, and can teach them to another at a small cost, and in a short time, is not that a jest? Theaetetus. Certainly. Stranger. And is there any more artistic or graceful form of jest than imitation? Theaetetus. Certainly not. And imitation is a very comprehensive term, which includes under one class the most diverse sorts of things. Stranger. We know, of course, that he who professes by one art to make all things is really a painter, and by the painter's art makes resemblances of real things, which have the same name with them. And he can deceive the less intelligent sort of young children, to whom he shows his pictures at a distance, into the belief that he has the absolute power of making whatever he likes. Theaetetus. Certainly. Stranger. And may there not be supposed to be an imitative art of reasoning? Is it not possible to enchant the hearts of young men by words poured through their ears, when they are still at a distance from the truth of facts, by exhibiting to them fictitious arguments, and making them think that they are true, and that the speaker is the wisest of men in all things? Theaetetus. Yes, why should there not be another such art? Stranger. But as time goes on, and their hearers advance in years, and come into closer contact with realities, and have learnt by sad experience to see and feel the truth of things, are not the greater part of them compelled to change many opinions which they formerly entertained, so that the great appears small to them, and the easy difficult, and all their dreamy speculations are overturned by the facts of life? Theaetetus. That is my view, as far as I can judge, although at my age I may be one of those who see things at a distance only. Stranger. And the wish of all of us, who are your friends, is and always will be to bring you as near to the truth as we can without the sad reality. And now I should like you to tell me whether the sophist is not visibly a magician and imitator of true being, or are we still disposed to think that he may have a true knowledge of the various matters about which he disputes? Theaetetus. But how can he, stranger? Is there any doubt, after what has been said, that he is to be located in one of the divisions of children's play? Stranger. Then we must place him in the class of magicians and mimics. Theaetetus. Certainly we must. Stranger. And now our business is not to let the animal out, for we have got him in a sort of dialectical net, and there is one thing which he decidedly will not escape. Theaetetus. What is that? Stranger. The inference that he is a juggler. Theaetetus. Precisely my own opinion of him. Stranger. Then, clearly, We ought as soon as possible to divide the image-making art, and go down into the net, and if the sophist does not run away from us, to seize him according to orders, and deliver him over to reason, who is the lord of the hunt, and proclaim the capture of him. And if he creeps into the recesses of the imitative art, and secrets himself in one of them, to divide again and follow him up until in some subsection of imitation he is caught. For our method of tackling each and all is one which neither he nor any other creature will ever escape in triumph. Theaetetus. Well said, and let us do as you propose. Stranger. Well then, pursuing the same analytic method as before, I think that I can discern two divisions of the imitative art, but I am not as yet able to see in which of them the desired form is to be found. Theaetetus. Will you tell me first, what are the two divisions of which you are speaking? Stranger. One is the art of likeness making. Generally, a likeness of anything is made by producing a copy which is executed according to the proportions of the original, similar in length and breadth and depth, each thing receiving also its appropriate color. Theaetetus. Is not this always the aim of imitation? Stranger. Not always. In works either of sculpture or of painting, which are of any magnitude, there is a certain degree of deception. For if artists were to give the true proportions of their fair works, the upper part, which is farther off, would appear to be out of proportion in comparison with the lower, which is nearer, and so they give up the truth in their images, and make only the proportions which appear to be beautiful, disregarding the real ones. Theaetetus. Quite true. Stranger. And that which, being other, is also like, may we not fairly call a likeness or image? Theaetetus. Yes. Stranger. And may we not, as I did just now, call that part of the imitative art which is concerned with making such images the art of likeness making? Theaetetus. Let that be the name. Stranger. And what shall we call those resemblances of the beautiful, which appear such owing to the unfavorable position of the spectator, whereas if a person had the power of getting a correct view of works of such magnitude, they would appear not even like that to which they profess to be like? May we not call these appearances, since they appear only and are not really like? Theaetetus. Certainly. Stranger. There is a great deal of this kind of thing in painting, and in all imitation. Theaetetus. Of course. Stranger. And may we not fairly call the sort of art which produces an appearance and not an image fantastic art? Theaetetus. Most fairly. Stranger. These then are the two kinds of image making, the art of making likenesses, and fantastic, or the art of making appearances. Theaetetus. True. Stranger. I was doubtful before in which of them I should place the sophist, nor am I even now able to see clearly. Verily, he is a wonderful and inscrutable creature, and now in the cleverest manner he has got into an impossible place. Theaetetus. Yes, he has. Stranger. Do you speak advisedly, or are you carried away at the moment by the habit of assenting into giving a hasty answer? Theaetetus. May I ask to what you are referring? Stranger. My dear friend, we are engaged in a very difficult speculation. There can be no doubt of that. For how a thing can appear and seem, and not be, or how a man can say a thing which is not true, has always been, and still remains, a very perplexing question. Can any one say or think that falsehood really exists, and avoid being caught in a contradiction? Indeed, Theaetetus, the task is a difficult one. Theaetetus. Why? Stranger. He who says that falsehood exists has the audacity to assert the being of not being, for this is implied in the possibility of falsehood. But, my boy, in the days when I was a boy, the great Parmenides protested against this doctrine, and to the end of his life he continued to inculcate the same lesson, always repeating both in verse and out of verse, "Keep your mind from this way of inquiry, for never will you show that not being is." Such is his testimony, which is confirmed by the very expression, when sifted a little. Would you object to begin with the consideration of the words themselves? Theaetetus. Never mind about me, I am only desirous that you should carry on the argument in the best way, and that you should take me with you. Stranger. Very good. And now say, do we venture to utter the forbidden word, not being? Theaetetus. Certainly we do. Stranger. Let us be serious then, and consider the question, neither in strife nor play. Suppose that one of the hearers of Parmenides was asked, to what is the term not being to be applied? Do you know what sort of object he would single out in reply, and what answer he would make to the inquirer? Theaetetus. That is a difficult question, and one not to be answered at all by a person like myself. Stranger. There is at any rate no difficulty in seeing that the predicate not being is not applicable to any being. Theaetetus. None, certainly. Stranger. And if not to being, then not to something? Theaetetus. Of course not. Stranger. It is also plain that in speaking of something we speak of being, for to speak of an abstract something, naked and isolated from all being, is impossible. Theaetetus. Impossible. Stranger. You mean, by assenting, to imply that he who says something must say some one thing? Theaetetus. Yes. Stranger. Some in the singular, t, you would say, is the sign of one. Some in the dual, tine, of two. Some in the plural, tines, of many? Theaetetus. Exactly. Stranger. Then he who says, not something, must say absolutely nothing. Theaetetus. Most assuredly. Stranger. And as we cannot admit that a man speaks and says nothing, he who says not being does not speak at all. Theaetetus. The difficulty of the argument can no further go. Stranger. Not yet, my friend, is the time for such a word, for there still remains of all perplexities the first and greatest, touching the very foundation of the matter. Theaetetus. What do you mean? Do not be afraid to speak. Stranger. To that which is may be attributed some other thing which is? Theaetetus. Certainly. Stranger. But can anything which is be attributed to that which is not? Theaetetus. Impossible. Stranger. And all number is to be reckoned among things which are? Theaetetus. Yes, surely number, if anything, has a real existence. Stranger. Then we must not attempt to attribute to not being number either in the singular or plural? Theaetetus. The argument implies that we should be wrong in doing so. Stranger. But how can a man either express in words, or even conceive in thought, things which are not, or a thing which is not, without number? Theaetetus. How indeed? Stranger. When we speak of things which are not, are we not attributing plurality to not being? Theaetetus. Certainly. Stranger. But on the other hand, when we say, what is not, do we not attribute unity? Theaetetus. Manifestly. Stranger. Nevertheless, we maintain that you may not and ought not to attribute being to not being? Theaetetus. Most true. Stranger. Do you see, then, that not being in itself can neither be spoken, uttered, or thought, but that it is unthinkable, unutterable, unspeakable, indescribable? Theaetetus. Quite true. Stranger. But if so, I was wrong in telling you just now that the difficulty which was coming is the greatest of all. Theaetetus. What? Is there a greater still behind? Stranger. Well, I am surprised, after what has been said already, that you do not see the difficulty in which he who would refute the notion of not being is involved. For he is compelled to contradict himself as soon as he makes the attempt. Theaetetus. What do you mean? Speak more clearly. Stranger. Do not expect clearness from me, for I, who maintain that not being has no part either in the one or many, just now spoke and am still speaking of not being as one, for I say not being. Do you understand? Theaetetus. Yes. Stranger. And a little while ago I said that not being is unutterable, unspeakable, indescribable. Do you follow? Theaetetus. I do, after a fashion. Stranger. When I introduced the word is, did I not contradict what I said before? Theaetetus. Clearly. Stranger. And in using the singular verb, did I not speak of not being as one? Theaetetus. Yes. Stranger. And when I spoke of not being as indescribable, and unspeakable, and unutterable, in using each of these words in the singular, did I not refer to not being as one? Theaetetus. Certainly. Stranger. And yet we say that, strictly speaking, it should not be defined either as one or many, and should not even be called it, for the use of the word it would imply a form of unity. Theaetetus. Quite true. Stranger. How, then, can any one put any faith in me? For now, as always, I am unequal to the refutation of not being. And therefore, as I was saying, do not look to me for the right way of speaking about not being. But come, let us try the experiment with you. Theaetetus. What do you mean? Stranger. Make a noble effort, as becomes youth, and endeavor with all your might to speak of not being in a right manner, without introducing into it either existence, or unity, or plurality. Theaetetus. It would be a strange boldness in me, which would attempt the task, when I see you thus discomfited. Stranger. Say no more of ourselves. But until we find some one or other who can speak of not being without number, we must acknowledge that the sophist is a clever rogue, who will not be got out of his hole. Theaetetus. Most true. Stranger. And if we say to him that he professes an art of making appearances, he will grapple with us and retort our argument upon ourselves. And when we call him an image maker, he will say, Pray, what do you mean at all by an image? And I should like to know, Theaetetus, how we can possibly answer the younker's question. Theaetetus. We shall doubtless tell him of the images which are reflected in water or in mirrors, also of sculptures, pictures, and other duplicates. Stranger. I see, Theaetetus, that you have never made the acquaintance of the sophist. Theaetetus. Why do you think so? Stranger. He will make believe to have his eyes shut, or to have none. Theaetetus. What do you mean? Stranger. When you tell him of something existing in a mirror or in sculpture, and address him as though he had eyes, he will laugh you to scorn, and will pretend that he knows nothing of mirrors and streams, or of sight at all. He will say that he is asking about an idea. Theaetetus. What can he mean? Stranger. The common notion pervading all these objects, which you speak of as many, and yet call by the single name of image, as though it were the unity under which they were all included. How will you maintain your ground against him? Theaetetus. How, stranger, can I describe an image except as something fashioned in the likeness of the true? Stranger. And do you mean this something to be some other true thing, or what do you mean? Theaetetus. Certainly not another true thing, but only a resemblance. Stranger. And you mean by true that which really is? Theaetetus. Yes. Stranger. And the not true is that which is the opposite of the true? Theaetetus. Exactly. Stranger. A resemblance, then, is not really real, if, as you say, not true? Theaetetus. Nay, but it is in a certain sense. Stranger. You mean to say, not in a true sense? Theaetetus. Yes, it is in reality only an image. Stranger. Then what we call an image is in reality really unreal. Theaetetus. In what a strange complication of being and not being we are involved. Stranger. Strange? I should think so. See how, by his reciprocation of opposites, the many-headed sophist has compelled us, quite against our will, to admit the existence of not being. Theaetetus. Yes, indeed, I see. Stranger. The difficulty is how to define his art without falling into a contradiction. Theaetetus. How do you mean? And where does the danger lie? Stranger. When we say that he deceives us with an illusion, and that his art is illusory, do we mean that our soul is led by his art to think falsely, or what do we mean? Theaetetus. There is nothing else to be said. Stranger. Again, false opinion is that form of opinion which thinks the opposite of the truth. You would assent? Theaetetus. Certainly. Stranger. You mean to say that false opinion thinks what is not? Theaetetus. Of course. Stranger. Does false opinion think that things which are not, or that in a certain sense they are? Theaetetus. Things that are not must be imagined to exist in a certain sense, if any degree of falsehood is to be possible. Stranger. And does not false opinion also think that things which most certainly exist do not exist at all? Theaetetus. Yes. Stranger. And here again is falsehood? Theaetetus. Falsehood, yes. Stranger. And in like manner a false proposition will be deemed to be one which asserts the non-existence of things which are, and the existence of things which are not? Theaetetus. There is no other way in which a false proposition can arise. Stranger. There is not. But the sophist will deny these statements. And indeed, how can any rational man assent to them, when the very expressions which we have just used were before acknowledged by us to be unutterable, unspeakable, indescribable, unthinkable? Do you see his point, Theaetetus? Theaetetus. Of course he will say that we are contradicting ourselves when we hazard the assertion that falsehood exists in opinion and in words. For in maintaining this we are compelled over and over again to assert being of not being, which we admitted just now to be an utter impossibility. Stranger. How well you remember! And now it is high time to hold a consultation as to what we ought to do about the sophist. For if we persist in looking for him in the class of false workers and magicians, you see that the handles for objection and the difficulties which will arise are very numerous and obvious. Theaetetus. They are indeed. Stranger. We have gone through but a very small portion of them, and they are really infinite. Theaetetus. If that is the case, we cannot possibly catch the sophist. Stranger. Shall we, then, be so faint-hearted as to give him up? Theaetetus. Certainly not. I should say, if we can get the slightest hold upon him. Stranger. Will you then forgive me, and, as your words imply, not be altogether displeased if I flinch a little from the grasp of such a sturdy argument? Theaetetus. To be sure I will. Stranger. I have a yet more urgent request to make. Theaetetus. Which is? Stranger. That you will promise not to regard me as a parricide. Theaetetus. And why? Stranger. Because, in self-defense, I must test the philosophy of my father Parmenides, and try to prove by main force that in a certain sense not being is, and that being, on the other hand, is not. Theaetetus. Some attempt of the kind is clearly needed. Stranger. Yes, a blind man, as they say, might see that. And unless these questions are decided in one way or another, no one, when he speaks of false words, or false opinion, or idols, or images, or imitations, or appearances, or about the arts which are concerned with them, can avoid falling into ridiculous contradictions. Theaetetus. Most true. Stranger. and therefore I must venture to lay hands on my father's argument, for if I am to be over-scrupulous, I shall have to give the matter up. Theaetetus. Nothing in the world should ever induce us to do so. Stranger. I have a third little request which I wish to make. Theaetetus. What is it? Stranger. You heard me say what I have always felt and still feel, that I have no heart for this argument? Theaetetus. I did. Stranger. I tremble at the thought of what I have said, and expect that you will deem me mad when you hear of my sudden changes and shiftings. Let me therefore observe that I am examining the question entirely out of regard for you. Theaetetus. There is no reason for you to fear that I shall impute any impropriety to you, if you attempt this refutation and proof. Take heart, therefore, and proceed. Stranger. And where shall I begin the perilous enterprise? I think that the road which I must take is— Theaetetus. Which? Let me hear. Stranger. I think that we had better, first of all, consider the points which at present are regarded as self-evident, lest we may have fallen into some confusion, and be too ready to assent to one another, fancying that we are quite clear about them. Theaetetus. Say more distinctly what you mean. Stranger. I think that Parmenides, and all who ever yet undertook to determine the number and nature of existences, talk to us in rather a light and easy strain. Theaetetus. How? Stranger. As if we had been children, to whom they repeated each his own mythus or story. One said that there were three principles, and that at one time there was war between certain of them, and then again there was peace, and they were married and begat children, and brought them up. And another spoke of two principles, a moist and a dry, or a hot and a cold, and made them marry and cohabit. The Eleatics, however, in our part of the world, say that all things are many in name, but in nature one. This is their mythus, which goes back to Xenophanes, and is even older. Then there are Ionian, and in more recent times Sicilian muses, who have arrived at the conclusion that to unite the two principles is safer, and to say that being is one and many, and that these are held together by enmity and friendship, ever parting, ever meeting, as the severer muses assert, while the gentler ones do not insist on the perpetual strife and peace, but admit a relaxation and alternation of them, peace and unity sometimes prevailing under the sway of Aphrodite, and then again plurality and war by reason of a principle of strife. Whether any of them spoke the truth in all this is hard to determine. Besides, antiquity and famous men should have reverence, and not be liable to accusations so serious. Yet one thing may be said of them without offense. Theaetetus. What thing? Stranger. That they went on their several ways, disdaining to notice people like ourselves. They did not care whether they took us with them, or left us behind them. Theaetetus. How do you mean? Stranger. I mean to say, that when they talk of one, two, or more elements, which are or have become, or are becoming, or again of heat mingling with cold, assuming in some other part of their works separations and mixtures, tell me, Theaetetus, do you understand what they mean by these expressions? When I was a younger man, I used to fancy that I understood quite well what was meant by the term not being, which is our present subject of dispute. And now you see in what a fix we are about it. Theaetetus. I see. Stranger. And very likely we have been getting into the same perplexity about being, and yet may fancy that when any body utters the word, we understand him quite easily, although we do not know about not being. But we may be equally ignorant of both. Theaetetus. I dare say. Stranger. And the same may be said of all the terms just mentioned. Theaetetus. True. Stranger. The consideration of most of them may be deferred, but we had better now discuss the chief captain and leader of them. Theaetetus. Of what are you speaking? You clearly think that we must first investigate what people mean by the word being. Stranger. You follow close at my heels, Theaetetus, for the right method, I conceive, will be to call into our presence the dualistic philosophers, and to interrogate them. Come, we will say, ye who affirm that hot and cold or any other two principles are the universe. What is this term which you apply to both of them, and what do you mean when you say that both and each of them are? How are we to understand the word are? Upon your view, are we to suppose that there is a third principle over and above the other two, three in all and not two? For clearly you cannot say that one of the two principles is being, and yet attribute being equally to both of them. For if you did, whichever of the two is identified with being will comprehend the other, and so they will be one and not two. Theaetetus. Very true. Stranger. But perhaps you mean to give the name of being to both of them together? Theaetetus. Quite likely. Stranger. Then, friends, we shall reply to them, the answer is plainly that the two will still be resolved into one. Theaetetus. Most true. Stranger. Since then we are in a difficulty, please to tell us what you mean when you speak of being, for there can be no doubt that you always from the first understood your own meaning, whereas we once thought that we understood you, but now we are in a great strait. Please to begin by explaining this matter to us, and let us no longer fancy that we understand you, when we entirely misunderstand you. There will be no impropriety in our demanding an answer to this question, either of the dualists or of the pluralists? Theaetetus. Certainly not. Stranger. And what about the assertors of the oneness of the all? Must we not endeavor to ascertain from them what they mean by being? Theaetetus. By all means. Stranger. Then let them answer this question. One, you say, alone is? Yes, they will reply. Theaetetus. True. Stranger. And there is something which you call being? Theaetetus. Yes. Stranger. And is being the same as one? And do you apply two names to the same thing? Theaetetus. What will be their answer, stranger? Stranger. It is clear, Theaetetus, that he who asserts the unity of being will find a difficulty in answering this or any other question. Theaetetus. Why so? Stranger. To admit of two names, and to affirm that there is nothing but unity, is surely ridiculous. Theaetetus. Certainly. Stranger. And equally irrational to admit that a name is anything? Theaetetus. How so? Stranger. To distinguish the name from the thing implies duality? Theaetetus. Yes. Stranger. And yet he who identifies the name with the thing will be compelled to say that it is the name of nothing, or if he says that it is the name of something, even then the name will only be the name of a name, and of nothing else? Theaetetus. True. Stranger. And the one will turn out to be only one of one, and, being absolute unity, will represent a mere name? Theaetetus. Certainly. Stranger. And would they say that the whole is other than the one that is, or the same with it? Theaetetus. To be sure they would, and they actually say so. Stranger. If being is a whole, as Parmenides sings, every way like unto the fullness of a well-rounded sphere, evenly balanced from the centre on every side, and must needs be neither greater nor less in any way, neither on this side nor on that. Then being has a centre and extremes, and having these, must also have parts. Theaetetus. True. Stranger. Yet that which has parts may have the attribute of unity in all the parts, and in this way being all and a whole may be one? Theaetetus. Certainly. Stranger. But that of which this is the condition cannot be absolute unity? Theaetetus. Why not? Stranger. Because, according to right reason, that which is truly one must be affirmed to be absolutely indivisible? Theaetetus. Certainly. Stranger. But this indivisible, if made up of many parts, will contradict reason? Theaetetus. I understand. Stranger. Shall we say that being is one and a whole, because it has the attribute of unity? Or shall we say that being is not a whole at all? Theaetetus. That is a hard alternative to offer. Stranger. Most true, for being, having in a certain sense the attribute of one, is yet proved not to be the same as one, and the all is therefore more than one. Theaetetus. Yes. Stranger. And yet, if being be not a whole, through having the attribute of unity, and there be such a thing as an absolute whole, being lacks something of its own nature? Theaetetus. Certainly. Stranger. Upon this view, again, being, having a defect of being, will become not being? Theaetetus. True. Stranger. And again, the all becomes more than one, for being and the whole will each have their separate nature? Theaetetus. Yes. Stranger. But if the whole does not exist at all the previous difficulties remain the same, and there will be the further difficulty, that besides having no being, being can never have come into being. Theaetetus. Why so? Stranger. Because that which comes into being always comes into being as a whole, so that he who does not give whole a place among beings cannot speak either of essence or generation as existing. Theaetetus. Yes, that certainly appears to be true. Stranger. Again, how can that which is not a whole have any quantity? For that which is of a certain quantity must necessarily be the whole of that quantity. Theaetetus. Exactly. Stranger. And there will be innumerable other points, each of them causing infinite trouble to him who says that being is either one or two. Theaetetus. The difficulties which are dawning upon us prove this. For one objection connects with another, and they are always involving what has preceded in a greater and worse perplexity. Stranger. We are far from having exhausted the more exact thinkers who treat of being and not being. But let us be content to leave them, and proceed to view those who speak less precisely, and we shall find, as the result of all, that the nature of being is quite as difficult to comprehend as that of not being. Theaetetus. Then now we will go to the others. Stranger. There appears to be a sort of war of giants and gods going on amongst them. They are fighting with one another about the nature of essence. Theaetetus. How is that? Stranger. Some of them are dragging down all things from heaven, and from the unseen to earth, and they literally grasp in their hands rocks and oaks. Of these they lay hold, and obstinately maintain that the things only which can be touched or handled have being or essence, because they define being and body as one. And if any one else says that what is not a body exists, they altogether despise him, and will hear of nothing but body. Theaetetus. I have often met with such men, and terrible fellows they are. Stranger. And that is the reason why their opponents cautiously defend themselves from above, out of an unseen world, mightily contending that true essence consists of certain intelligible and incorporeal ideas. The bodies of the materialists, which by them are maintained to be the very truth, they break up into little bits by their arguments, and affirm them to be, not essence, but generation and motion. Between the two armies, Theaetetus, there is always an endless conflict raging concerning these matters. Theaetetus. True. Stranger. Let us ask each party in turn to give an account of that which they call essence. Theaetetus. How shall we get it out of them? Stranger. With those who make being to consist in ideas, there will be less difficulty, for they are civil people enough. But there will be very great difficulty, or rather an absolute impossibility, in getting an opinion out of those who drag everything down to matter. Shall I tell you what we must do? Theaetetus. What? Stranger. Let us, if we can, really improve them. But if this is not possible, let us imagine them to be better than they are, and more willing to answer in accordance with the rules of argument, and then their opinion will be more worth having, for that which better men acknowledge has more weight than that which is acknowledged by inferior men. Moreover, we are no respecters of persons, but seekers after truth. Theaetetus. Very good. Str. Then now, on the supposition that they are improved, let us ask them to state their views. And do you interpret them? Theaetetus. Agreed. Str. Let them say whether they would admit that there is such a thing as a mortal animal. Theaetetus. Of course they would. Str. And do they not acknowledge this to be a body having a soul? Theaetetus. Certainly they do. Str. Meaning to say that the soul is something which exists? Theaetetus. True. Str. And do they not say that one soul is just, and another unjust, and that one soul is wise, and another foolish? Theaetetus. Certainly. Str. And that the just and wise soul becomes just and wise by the possession of justice and wisdom, and the opposite under opposite circumstances? Theaetetus. Yes, they do. Str. But surely that which may be present, or may be absent, will be admitted by them to exist? Theaetetus. Certainly. Str. And allowing that justice, wisdom, the other virtues, and their opposites exist, as well as a soul in which they inhere, do they affirm any of them to be visible and tangible, or are they all invisible? Theaetetus. They would say that hardly any of them are visible. Str. And would they say that they are corporeal? Theaetetus. They would distinguish. The soul would be said by them to have a body. But as to the other qualities of justice, wisdom, and the like, about which you asked, they would not venture either to deny their existence, or to maintain that they were all corporeal. Str. Verily, Theaetetus, I perceive a great improvement in them. The real aborigines, children of the dragon's teeth, would have been deterred by no shame at all, but would have obstinately asserted that nothing is which they are not able to squeeze in their hands. Theaetetus. That is pretty much their notion. Str. Let us push the question. For if they will admit that any, even the smallest particle of being, is incorporeal, it is enough. They must then say what that nature is which is common to both the corporeal and incorporeal, and which they have in their mind's eye when they say of both of them that they are. Perhaps they may be in a difficulty, and if this is the case, there is a possibility that they may accept a notion of ours respecting the nature of being, having nothing of their own to offer. Theaetetus. What is the notion? Tell me, and we shall soon see. Str. My notion would be that anything which possesses any sort of power to affect another, or to be affected by another, if only for a single moment, however trifling the cause, and however slight the effect, has real existence, and I hold that the definition of being is simply power. Theaetetus. They accept your suggestion, having nothing better of their own to offer. Str. Very good. Perhaps we, as well as they, may one day change our minds. But for the present, this may be regarded as the understanding which is established with them. Theaetetus. Agreed. Str. Let us now go to the friends of ideas. Of their opinions too you shall be the interpreter. Theaetetus. I will. Str. To them we say, you would distinguish essence from generation? Theaetetus. Yes, they reply. Str. And you would allow that we participate in generation with the body, and through perception, but we participate with the soul through thought in true essence, and essence you would affirm to be always the same and immutable, whereas generation or becoming varies? Theaetetus. Yes, that is what we should affirm. Str. Well, fair sirs, we say to them, what is this participation which you assert of both? Do you agree with our recent definition? Theaetetus. What definition? Str. We said that being was an active or passive energy, arising out of a certain power, which proceeds from elements meeting with one another. Perhaps your ears, Theaetetus, may fail to catch their answer, which I recognize because I have been accustomed to hear it. Theaetetus. And what is their answer? Stranger. They deny the truth of what we were just now saying to the aborigines about existence. Theaetetus. What was that? Stranger. Any power of doing or suffering in a degree, however slight, was held by us to be a sufficient definition of being? Theaetetus. True. Stranger. They deny this, and say that the power of doing or suffering is confined to becoming, and that neither power is applicable to being. Theaetetus. And is there not some truth in what they say? Stranger. Yes, but our reply will be that we want to ascertain from them more distinctly whether they further admit that the soul knows, and that being or essence is known. Theaetetus. There can be no doubt that they say so. Stranger. And is knowing and being known doing or suffering, or both? Or is the one doing and the other suffering, or has neither any share in either? Theaetetus. Clearly neither has any share in either, for if they say anything else they will contradict themselves. Stranger. I understand, but they will allow that if to know is active, then of course to be known is passive, and on this view, being, in so far as it is known, is acted upon by knowledge, and is therefore in motion, for that which is in a state of rest cannot be acted upon, as we affirm. Theaetetus. True. Stranger. And, O heavens, can we ever be made to believe that motion and life and soul and mind are not present with perfect being? Can we imagine that being is devoid of life and mind, and exists in awful unmeaningness, an everlasting fixture? Theaetetus. That would be a dreadful thing to admit, Stranger. Stranger. But shall we say that being has mind and not life? Theaetetus. How is that possible? Stranger. Or shall we say that both inhere in perfect being, but that it has no soul which contains them? Theaetetus. And in what other way can it contain them? Stranger. Or that being has mind and life and soul, but although endowed with soul, remains absolutely unmoved? Theaetetus. All three suppositions appear to me to be irrational. Stranger. Under being, then, we must include motion, and that which is moved? Theaetetus. Certainly. Stranger. Then, Theaetetus, our inference is, that if there is no motion, neither is there any mind anywhere, or about anything, or belonging to any one. Theaetetus. Quite true. Stranger. And yet this equally follows, if we grant that all things are in motion. Upon this view, too, mind has no existence. Theaetetus. How so? Stranger. Do you think that sameness of condition and mode and subject could ever exist without a principle of rest? Theaetetus. Certainly not. Stranger. Can you see how, without them, mind could exist, or come into existence anywhere? Theaetetus. No. Stranger. And surely contend we must in every possible way against him who would annihilate knowledge and reason and mind, and yet ventures to speak confidently about anything. Theaetetus. Yes, with all our might. Stranger. Then the philosopher, who has the truest reverence for these qualities, cannot possibly accept the notion of those who say that the whole is at rest, either as unity or in many forms, and he will be utterly deaf to those who assert universal motion. As children say entreatingly, Give us both. So he will include both the movable and immovable in his definition of being and all. Theaetetus. Most true. Stranger. And now do we not seem to have gained a fair notion of being? Theaetetus. Yes, truly. Stranger. Alas, Theaetetus, methinks that we are now only beginning to see the real difficulty of the enquiry into the nature of it. Theaetetus. What do you mean? Stranger. O my friend, Do you not see that nothing can exceed our ignorance, and yet we fancy that we are saying something good? Theaetetus. I certainly thought that we were, and I do not at all understand how we never found out our desperate case. Stranger. Reflect, after having made these admissions, may we not be justly asked the same questions which we ourselves were asking of those who said that all was hot and cold? Theaetetus. What were they? Will you recall them to my mind? Stranger. To be sure I will, and I will remind you of them by putting the same questions to you which I did to them, and then we shall get on. Theaetetus. True. Stranger. Would you not say that rest and motion are in the most entire opposition to one another? Theaetetus. Of course. Stranger. And yet you would say that both and either of them equally are? Theaetetus. I should. Stranger. And when you admit that both or either of them are, do you mean to say that both or either of them are in motion? Theaetetus. Certainly not. Stranger. Or do you wish to imply that they are both at rest, when you say that they are? Theaetetus. Of course not. Stranger. Then you conceive of being as some third and distinct nature, under which rest and motion are alike included, and observing that they both participate in being, you declare that they are. Theaetetus. Truly, we seem to have an intimation that being is some third thing, when we say that rest and motion are. Stranger. Then being is not the combination of rest and motion, but something different from them? Theaetetus. So it would appear. Stranger. Being, then, according to its own nature, is neither in motion nor at rest? Theaetetus. That is very much the truth. Stranger. Where then is a man to look for help, who would have any clear or fixed notion of being in his mind? Theaetetus. Where indeed? Stranger. I scarcely think that he can look anywhere, for that which is not in motion must be at rest, and again that which is not at rest must be in motion, but being is placed outside of both these classes. Is this possible? Theaetetus. Utterly impossible. Stranger. Here then is another thing which we ought to bear in mind. Theaetetus. What? Stranger. When we were asked to what we were to assign the appellation of not being, we were in the greatest difficulty. Do you remember? Theaetetus. To be sure. Stranger. And are we not now in as great a difficulty about being? Theaetetus. I should say, stranger, that we are in one, which is, if possible, even greater. Stranger. Then let us acknowledge the difficulty. And as being and not being are involved in the same perplexity, there is hope that when the one appears more or less distinctly, the other will equally appear. And if we are able to see neither, there may still be a chance of steering our way in between them without any great discredit. Theaetetus. Very good. End of Part 2 of Sophist. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards.